Welcome to Conscious Living Radio, FM 100.5 in Vancouver, Co-op Radio, Wednesdays 6 to 7 p.m. I'm Tasha Simms. Are you going to introduce yourself, Mark?
And I'm Mark Caron. I'm hiding in the back.
Hiding in the background is Mark Caron, our producer. Today's guest, director Jennifer Abbott. She's a Sundance Genie Award-winning filmmaker. She's been making movies about urgent social, political, and environmental issues for about 25 years. She's best known for films like The Corporation, Us and Them, Sea Blind, and this year at the Vancouver International Festival, which is opening September 24th, runs through to October 7th, she has two films. Her feature documentaries, The New Corporation, The Unfortunately Necessary Sequel, and The Magnitude of All Things. Go to VIFF.org and set yourself up. I really recommend seeing both these films. I think they're gems and tap into a lot of pathology around what's going on in the world today, capitalism, and just promoting greater consciousness around the health of our planet and perhaps steps that we all can take to support that. Today we're discussing The Magnitude of All Things. It's a poetic and touching exploration of the acceptance of loss and grief and the psychology underpinning our existential climate crisis. So welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Your films are such different styles, but I found them both so powerful. The Magnitude of All Things, I mean, it was poetic, I guess is a word I would use. It was poignant. And this weaving that you do of the personal and collective planetary grief, where you're merging stories of climate change with the recollections of the loss of your sister. I mean, it really was heartfelt. And I'm wondering if we could just start with your understanding of this new phenomena where people are grieving what's going on with the planet, this collective grief. I mean, there's even a name for it, right? The psychology of climate change. How do you think that's impacting both our mental health and what's really important to understand about that phenomena?
Well, it's interesting because the idea for The Magnitude of All Things actually came to me about 8 years ago, actually, when I was just in my garden on Salt Spring Island. And I noticed that I thought it was snowing. It was July. I looked up. There's beautiful white particles floating down from the sky. And yet it turned out it was ash. And so I had this real moment that triggered me around grief and its understanding because I went, oh, here I am. It's ash. This is from a climate change related forest fire. The feeling I have is grief, which sort of surprised me. It was the first time I had and I knew grief well because I had lost my sister a couple of years ago. So that's when I understood that, of course, we can experience as humans the feeling of grief when it comes to not only the loss of our beloveds, but also non-human animals and the world upon which we live and share this earth with. So it was very interesting to me because I had the idea to make the film, and then I started researching it and discovered that there indeed was this new field of climate psychology. There was a term called ecological grief, ecological anxiety, eco-despair. And, I think that if you're in Vancouver right now, you're probably feeling it, or anywhere along the west coast of the United States. Yeah. So that was when I actually don't think I really realized what I was getting myself into. But that was when I decided that I'd make a film about this. It was quite a while ago. It was way before it was in the mainstream. Way back then, I'd say I'm making a film about ecological grief, and no one would know what the heck I was talking about. Yeah.
And yet Indigenous people have been feeling it for so long, this pain, because there's no separation, or often not such a division between self and nature, self and the land. It's almost an extension of self in a lot of Indigenous teachings. And so that feeling that you're talking about, that grief, has been present for ages, right?
Well, certainly. And I think not only that, when we look at First Nations, this is the end of the world as we know it now. But of course, First Nations already experienced that once with colonization, with the end of the world as they knew it. So we have such a lot to learn from First Nations, both in terms of their relationship to the natural world, but also that, their resilience, and that they've actually kind of been here before.
You interviewed Indigenous people in the film, climate scientists, activists. How did you decide who to speak with and who to focus on?
Well, I mean, I think it was very important that we go to the front lines, that we speak with people about how they're feeling on the front lines of climate change. And so, that's why we interview Anote Tong from, the Republic of Kiribati and the Sinking Island, or the Inuit in Nunavut, or the Sapara in the Amazon, and the Wanarua in New South Wales. So these are people who are literally, watching their homeland melt or be destroyed by mining or fires, or basically submerged by the rising ocean. So for us, but what I think is very different for our film is that when we were there, we were asking people how they were feeling, right? We weren't asking people about the science, or about like change and adaptation. We were asking, okay, how are you feeling at this moment in time? So we really just wanted those very raw and real and visceral responses from people on the front line. And so obviously to get that, we had to go there, and that's who we prioritized in the film.
Were there key commonalities in their perspectives in terms of what we can do to confront climate change? Was there anything you saw in common with all of them that that would be beneficial for us to know about and kind of implement?
Well, I mean, I think it's in the film, of course. One very important and common theme is, the people we met had the courage to face their deepest fears and sorrows, to go towards them, as did my sister, because of course there's this parallel narrative that tells the story of my sister's death, and she was able to find the courage to go towards her deepest fears and sorrows. So I think that's sort of a common theme with everyone we met, that these were very courageous people, and as a culture we don't this is not something that is innate in Western culture. We tend to avoid the hard things. We certainly look away from death. We glorify youth and sometimes pretty superficial pursuits, and so I think that it's a film that shows a very different perspective than what we're used to.
Do you think our avoidance of feeling loss, which is such a universal thing, you can't be human and avoid that, it just doesn't happen. Do you think this sort of innate desire to avoid pain or move away from pain has somehow facilitated a kind of normalizing of climate change for some people? Do you know what I mean?
I don't know about normalizing. It's interesting you use that word, because all of my work underneath it, it has this motivation to make the familiar strange. Like to take, take things that's just the way it is, and sort of shed a new light onto an institution or a custom or a social norm, and just say, oh no, this is not just the way it is, it's socially constructed. And if it's socially constructed, we can reconstruct it, right?
Right.
In the case, so normalize, I'm not so sure that, I actually feel what's happening is more that the scale and violence of climate change is just too much for most people to cope with and to fathom or to understand. And so, and also it's very scary. It can be very depressing. So yeah, I have a lot of compassion for people who don't know what to do with it, right? And I think sadly, as a culture, we have been extremely good at putting it off or not taking it serious. I mean, we've been, it's pretty bleak, and we have been warned by scientists now for a long time, but especially the last 20, 25 years. So, or even 30, and that we managed to turn away, and that we've managed to be so ineffective, I think in large part is because it's just so difficult to face. So I think that's in part what my film is trying to address, is to explore that, and also for people who do feel they're on shaky ground, to give them the courage to face it, to go towards our deepest fears and sorrows. And it's only from that place that we're really going to be able to stand up and start making effective change together to change the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I meant by normalization, I meant as opposed to, because people don't know what to do, the urgency is so intense that it feels like, oh, well, that's what's happening. There's nothing, it's a kind of almost not hopelessness, but inactivity, because they feel there's nothing they can do. So it becomes a part of our world without it being actually not something that we need to live with. It's something we need to do something about. I was kind of going at it from that angle.
Okay, sure,
yeah.
Sure.
But I loved your answer. I think it's really important that you can't deny something and then expect to make change about in that area. You've actually got to be with the feelings that are there, and it is what's so poignant about your film, is this sense of loss. Feeling loss and grief is not the opposite of hope, that hope can actually arise in that state. And almost, I don't know if you would agree with this statement. It's something I've used, having experienced death personally quite a bit. Death to me is a teacher. I see it as, which is not our culture. Our culture is like, get through it, get over it, move through. But if you actually enter it and allow how profound the experience is to impact what you do and how you live, is that relevant for you? Is that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, absolutely, that's my experience. And not only that, my sister, she had done a lot of personal work before she had got sick. And, she was able to walk that line perfectly between, on the one hand, fighting and wanting and trying to live, but on the other hand, surrendering. But because she had done such a lot of work, and because she wanted, if she was going to die, she wanted to die a conscious death, that she actually knew she could teach me something about life and death in her death. So she consciously actually, I mean, I was privileged enough that she consciously taught me something about death while she was dying, which is a pretty selfless thing to do as you reach the end of your life. But I think it's, it's not only a teacher, it's also just part of who we are. And when we deny that part of ourselves, we're kind of not whole. So, it's a teacher, yes, but it's also a teacher that's within us. It's part of, part of us. And I think that's a very scary thing to really understand at the deepest level. But when we do, then we can just live so much more consciously and engaged and sort of without fear. You know, I think a lot of people, I mean, myself included, of course, spend a lot of energy putting death aside, like pushing it away. And if we may not be conscious of it, but it takes a lot of energy to do that. And, you know, with climate change, there's a lot of similar feelings, and it's such an existential crisis. And we do have to learn how to come to terms with grief and loss and endings and death. Because, you know, I'm not saying that we're just headed for nihilism and there's no chance for us and we're inevitably going towards a 4-degree uninhabitable world. Not at all. And nor am I saying let's give up. It's over. It's not over. It's more that once we actually face the magnitude of the situation, that we will really be able to rise to the challenge of this moment in time and bring out the best in humanity when that is what is desperately needed.
I love that. There are some beautiful lines in the film, a lot of them said by elders. There's, I loved, if the land hurts, we hurt. And again, just a demonstration of that lack of separation between nature and self. But I'm curious, I mean, as much as we may yearn for one earth, one energy, a we consciousness instead of me, 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 I wonder if you have any ideas on what specifically might need to shift in attitude that would facilitate actions that reflect we instead of me, 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 and all the profiteering and, you know, self, need for self that, and I don't even know if you agree with that or if I'm interpreting it, but that's one of the pieces that I saw in the film was this sense of lack of the inclusivity with the whole, that it's a we, it's not, I think it was scientist in your film who talked about that moment where he realized I'm not as important as the structure of nature. I mean, it's profound. If everyone woke up to that, things would be so different. So my question really is, do you have any ideas or insights as to what would facilitate that kind of attitudinal shift in perception?
Sure. I mean, I think that reading, reflecting, writing, exposing yourself to art and to films. And I mean, I address both those issues in both my new films, The New Corporation, co-directed with Joel Bakken. You know, we look very closely at neoliberal culture and, you know, the rise of the individual, like, above all, and me, me, me. And then in that film, we also highlight the pandemic and people's response to in the pandemic, the communitarianism, the altruism, the being there for our neighbor, the thinking of others and other communities is an extraordinary example and model for who we can be, right? I mean, I think corporate capitalism has reduced us to consumers, and of course we have to reinvigorate that part of ourselves which are, you know, engaged citizens. And, you know, as I say, through the process of and many people are already there, obviously, but through the process of self-education and really also looking at our own lives within dominant culture, I do feel, you know, especially today with all the different existential crises that we face, you know, a lot of people feel very disenfranchised, very alienated. Obviously, many are economically struggling. And so I think these questions are coming up, like, surely there's more, you know, and surely we can find ways to live a more meaningful life. And more people are rejecting this idea that consumption or simply, you know, fighting for my own survival, or even my own family's survival, is actually kind of a vacuous path. So I see it happening in the broader culture a lot, and I think sometimes it takes a crisis to wake people up and to spur them on to find a deeper way and a more meaningful way to be in this world.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully that's what's happening. That would be a really optimistic and hopeful worldview. If your film could do one thing, impact people in a certain way, what would be at the core of that you would want people to get? What's that impact that you really want people to get?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, there's, as we all know, the predictions around climate change are fairly catastrophic, and it's easy just to feel overwhelmed and defeated. I think I would really hope after viewers see my film that they would be able to find the courage to go forward, to face the situation and to take action, but to take action together, like not these individual, we're going to use energy efficient light bulbs, but rather let's take action together to change the system that's destroying us. And so, I think even though we don't know if we'll be successful, that is really, really important and really key. We just do it because it's really the only right thing to do. And so I think I really would hope some viewers would find a lot of courage and maybe a little bit of peace too, like in terms of reconciling some of the difficult feelings they may be having about climate change. And I think actually one of our impact goals is fire yourself up. Turn your grief about climate change into action. So I would just really hope that that the film fires people up.
Right. I love that. Okay, so The Magnitude of All Things is screening at the Vancouver International Film Festival, September 24th to October 7th, as well as Jennifer's other film, which you've got to see. It's really amazing. The New Corporation, which follows The Corporation, which you made some years ago, right? The Unfortunately Necessary sequel, which is a profound look at capitalism and the state of democracy and all kinds of other really juicy things. Thanks, Jennifer, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.
And you're listening to Conscious Living Radio, 100.5 FM in Vancouver, Co-op Radio.